know why? If this is one little piece of one little book, right? Think what those books really contained, and now find out why they were burned. The first creatures wouldn't do it, so we go to the second. Genesis, by the sweat of thy face will be thy bread, until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou wilt return. Does that sound like God talking to somebody? Or is it more of human politics? And the Lord said, Behold, the man has become one of us, to know good and evil, and now lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Now, the interesting thing is that they did create another being, and that being they called the Adamic race, or we refer to now as the Adam. But again, not an individual. The Adams and Eves were created, but they were called the Adamic race. And they had to think, when they created the second generation offspring, they thought to themselves, what did we do the first time that was wrong? What we did the first time it was wrong is we gave the power to our first sons, the firstborn, the intellectual abilities and genius that we ourselves possess. And that's why they got all arrogant and took off. So the next time we make a group, our servants, we will literally dumb them down. We will close off the centers of the high intelligences that we have, the technological intelligences and so on. And, I mean, you can do that in a behaviorist laboratory now, just using the brain synapses. But they were doing it on a DNA level. So that's exactly what they did. They created a being whose intelligence level would be much more suppressed, and that was the Adamic race, and they sent them out to be the servants. And they had a feminine counterpart that could not at that time breed through mating, but they were feminine. The female versions. And the Lord said, Look, the people are united, and they all have one language. Come on, let us go down, and therefore confound their language so they cannot understand one another's speech. Now, as I said, in the Bible, you'll hear certain terms, and you'll hear this term naked, that Adam and Eve went into the garden naked. Well, what does that mean? That God was wearing Levi jeans then, and everybody had clothes? The word naked is another, euphemism, a cryptic euphemism in the Bible that refers to a state of being in intellectual ignorance, nakedness, into the garden in a naked state, meaning that they had suppressed intelligence. But reduced intelligence of what, specifically? Remember how I just quoted those books where it says they cannot eat off the tree of life? Remember that? Well, the forbidden fruit, this term, the forbidden fruit of the tree of life, is another euphemism for the knowledge of human genetics. Because the tree of life symbol has always been the symbol for that. For what we call the caduceus of Hermes, or the DNA spiral. In ancient times it was known as the caduceus of Hermes, or before that, the tree of life, because that's exactly what it is. And they said it had its roots in the earth and its branches in heaven. And then later, that tree became known as the tree of good and evil. And all the people who think they're into the occultism go, the tree of good and evil, thinking that means something esoteric. Actually, it doesn't. This term does not refer to anything esoteric. It refers only to the two contingents or races and residents on this planet, both custodians and utilizers of the knowledge of genetics. The good and the evil, for want of a better term. It's their tree, meaning their knowledge. So naked and not being able to eat off the tree of life, not being able to eat off the fruit of the tree of life, is a euphemism for the Adamic race not having the intellectual ability that their masters had, the high scientific, technical knowledge of reproduction on that level, and the science of biology and technology. And that's what these symbols all refer to. Do you know in the Kabbalistic tree of life, anybody familiar with this? There are 22 paths. 22? Anybody into genetics know the number 22 and the chromosomes on the DNA? So when we read about the forbidden fruit, we've got to ask ourselves a question. This symbol is even styrated in the symbols of the chakras, or an analog to that, right? The forbidden fruit relates to genetics. If it doesn't, why is a technical company that expressly involves itself in technology having the same symbol from the book of Revelation? And they're not the only corporation that do this. There's many others. So back to like when we did in the first presentation, this concept of the serpent in the garden that has at least come down to us through the Bible. This concept of Adam and Eve being visited by a serpent. Now the interesting thing is that as this Adamic race was slaving away with no trade unions and no extra time and anything like that, overtime, working for their hidden masters, these Atlanteans, this became known to the sons of the serpent who were living on Lemuria, because they were probably keeping tabs, watching what their forefathers were doing. And they then had this predicament, didn't they? Because they said, look, we got free from these masters. We're doing all right over here with our high civilization and great culture. But they've created a second race, but they've used also the human DNA. So in a way, aren't they our cousins? Right? Aren't the Adamic race now cousins to us? But they're in a dumbed down state. So they said, we're in a bit of a predicament. What would happen if we went back in surreptitiously to Eden, into Atlantis, and told them that, and tried to get them to come with us? And that is exactly what happened. The serpent entered into the garden and discoursed with the Adamic race. But the stories of the ancient legends say that the Adams, the male ones, didn't kind of get it. It didn't make too much sense to them. But the Eves really got into it. Right? And they were very responsive to what the sons of the serpent were saying. And so would you, because they said that they were comely and attractive, had magical powers, tremendous intellect, but a divine spiritual ray, right, of great wisdom. And they came into the daughters and they talked to them, and the daughters of Eve said, hey, this looks like a good deal, let's get going, pack up. And they dragged the Adams with them. I've had some women say, why did they even bother doing that? But you know how things are, right? So anyway, a lot of them did leave. To cut a long story short, because the Eves understood this concept, somehow they started to exit. Again, maybe not all, right? But enough of a large contingency exited with the sons of the serpent, and the sons of the serpent said to them, know ye not your gods? What we can do, you can do also and more. So the coming of the serpent into the garden has been completely put before us opposite than what it was, for good reason, and it doesn't make any sense. But the fact that it hasn't made any sense doesn't seem to bother anyone, right? Because women are suppressed, they hold no office, everything works. But the very fact of the tree and the serpent, like I said before, goes back to the whole concept of Egypt and the mysteries of what? This very symbol of the tree and the serpent is your DNA, and the initiation back into that knowledge that was sequestered from you. And isn't it interesting, scientists will not like this one, isn't it interesting that women were the ones who took to that knowledge first? Isn't it always been that science was a male patriarchal thing that's been put before us? Science and the matriarchy are very connected. There's a long story about how science and the rise of science in the world is connected to the female matriarchal system. It's been not covered a lot in our societies. Now, because the females, one more anecdote about this, is because the Eves were originally the most receptive to their teachers, the sons of the serpent teachers, that was never forgotten by the sons of the serpent. And later when they got to Lemuria, the Eves were given positions of superiority. They were what was called the beloved. And that is where we get the priestess classes and the matriarchal powers coming from. The fact that women were keepers of the secrets, initiators, right, and mystics, where we get this from comes from Lemuria and the connection to Oceana and the sons of the serpent. That initiating power. Because it was never forgotten that they were the beloved ones. You know in the Bible when it talks about Mary Magdalene being the harlot? That word harlot is a mistranslation of a word called herodulai. Herodulai, I think in Greek. And you know what herodulai means? Sacred or beloved one. Right? And Jesus, right, was meant to be the immaculate child, right? What's this connection again? And we find in the Bible. By the way, the Egyptian hieroglyphic for woman was, guess what? A serpent. Then Madame Helena Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society said something, because she was on the ball with all of this. The appellation Satan in Hebrew and adversary belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. See that? What she's been saying in her books? Now also, when you read this term, born of a virgin, since we're talking about the Bible, we have to understand that this word immaculate conception is another covered term for genetic conception, meaning without sexuality. This is a euphemism for conception between a woman and a member of the serpent race. Remember I said that the female